everyone. Once again, I am Roseto de Orquesta and welcome to Pantas Malaya. So today, we're going to talk about some parts of your thesis writing. There are parts in your chapter 1, especially in chapter 1. So we're going to talk about that, and these parts are about the statement of the problem. How are we going to create a how are we going to create an effective statement of the problem, then the objectives of the study with your general and specific objectives, and then the significance of the study, the scope and limitations, and as well as the definition of terms. So now let's talk about statement of the problem. Okay, what is a statement of a problem? So it is a statement of a problem is a concise description of the problem or issues a project seeks to address. So these are the things that you want to solve with your research, your thesis. Okay, we all talk about this. These are the problems. These are the identified problems. You have to put that into your chapter 1, especially on the part of your statement of the problem. The problem statement identifies the current state, the desired future state, and any gaps between the two. So problem statement is an important communication tool that can help ensure everyone working on a project knows what the problem they need to address is and why the project is important. Without the statement of the problem, there is no way the team could work properly on the research, because these are the basis of the actions to be taken all throughout the research procedures. Because you are in the statement of problem, you will declare what are the problems that needed to be addressed in your research. What are the problems that needs to be solved with your research. Okay, so that is the statement of the problem. And there are key characteristics of a statement of the problem. We are having at least 6 of them. So a good research problem should have the following characteristics. It should address a gap in knowledge. That's the first. It should be significant enough to contribute to the existing body of research. That's number 2. And then the third one is it should lead to further research. The problem should render itself to investigation through collection of data. So that is the fourth. And the fifth one is it should be of interest to the researcher and suit his or her skills, time, and resources. And then the last one is the approach towards solving the problem should be ethical. So those are the key characteristics of a good research problem on writing a statement of the problem. And there is an important part, or there are 3 important parts in writing a statement of a problem. So we can call this a format. So we should follow a format in writing a statement of a problem. So for example, you are going to write a statement of the problem in 3 different paragraphs. The first paragraph should consist of or describes a desired goal or ideal situation. So explains how things should be. That would be your first paragraph or the first part of your statement of the problem. It should describe a desired goal or ideal situation. It should explain how things should be. Take this an example. So we say the dried fish of Pagadian will be able to compete in the global market. So that's your part A. So that's the thought of your part A or your first paragraph. The telling that the dried fish or bulad in Pagadian City will be able to compete in the global market, or able to compete in the global market. So we can export our dried fish that is made here in Pagadian City. So that's the ideal. That's your first paragraph of the statement of the problem. Now, if we jump to your second paragraph, or the part B, or the second part of your statement of the problem, so the second part of your statement of the problem should describe a condition that prevents the goal, state, or value in part A from being achieved or realized at this time. So you have to explain how the current situation falls short of the goal or ideal. So the ideal or the desired goal is that the dried fish in Pagadian City is able to compete in the global market. It can be exported. That's the part, the first paragraph, right? The ideal part of your statement of the problem. Now, in your second part, or the second paragraph, you're going to talk about why is it not competing in the global market. We know, or you know, that the dried fish in Pagadian City could be exported, but why it is not being exported? What are the conditions that prevents that goal or that state or that first paragraph from being real or being achievable? Now, with that, you have already stated your problem. So in part C, or the third paragraph of your statement of the problem, you would identify, or your third paragraph should identify the way you purpose to improve the current situation and move it closer to the goal or ideal. So the goal or the ideal part is in first paragraph. Your second paragraph is identifying the problems that hinders the goal from happening or from making it a reality. The situation in part A, and then by identifying that problem in part B or second paragraph, in part C, you are trying now to devise a solution or present a solution to make your part A becomes realistic. You are going to solve the problem in part B or second paragraph so that your part A or your first paragraph will prevail. That is the purpose of your third paragraph. So first paragraph is your ideal part, or supposed to be. Then your second paragraph is what makes it what keeps it from happening. So this second paragraph is your problem. Now the third paragraph should be your solution. Why do we need to include a hint on our solution in the statement of the problem? Because we are trying to bridge your statement of the problem to your objectives of the study, which is the second part of this topic. Okay, so now that you have created your statement of the problem with the ideal part, first paragraph, the problem in the second paragraph, and then a hint on your solution on the third paragraph. Now let's jump to the objectives of the study. So the research objectives, or the objectives of the study, describe concisely what the research is trying to achieve. So they summarize the accomplishments of a researcher wishes to achieve through the project and provides direction of the study. A research objective must be achievable. It must be framed keeping in mind the available time, infrastructure required for research, and other resources. So before forming a research objective, you should Read about all developments in your area of research and find gaps in knowledge that need to be addressed. This will help you come up with suitable objectives for your research. So in the objectives, in your objectives of the study, it should contain two parts. The first part is general objectives, and the second part is the specific objectives. General objectives of your study states what you expect to achieve in general terms from the word general objectives. So the general objective of your study states what you expect to achieve in general terms, in a broader manner. What are you trying to solve, to achieve with your research? Now, if it comes to the specific objectives, breaks down the general objectives into smaller parts, logically connected parts that systematically address the various aspects of the problem. So it is like you have this one single problem as your general objectives, or you have this one general objectives, and then out of this one general objectives, you are going to break these general objectives into different parts, into smaller parts. So that would be your specific objectives. So from your general objectives, you are going to create your specific objectives. So the specific objectives is the fragment of your general objectives. Take a look at this example in on how to create a general and specific objectives. As you can see, so the research study is about to assess the accessibility and acceptability of the voluntary counseling and testing services for HIV infection in Kibale X. And then in Kibale X had the following general and specific objectives. So from that research study, we extracted the general objective, which is to identify factors that affects the acceptability of VCT services and to assess community attitudes towards comprehensive care and support for people living with HIV or AIDS. Now, from that general objectives, we broke down that general objectives into smaller parts, and now we have the specific objectives, and these are the to assess the knowledge, attitude, and practice of the community towards HIV, AIDS, and VCT services, to identify barriers and concerns related to VCT and its uptake, to assess the awareness and perception of the study community regarding comprehensive care and support for people living with HIV or AIDS. As you can see, from that general objectives, we have created 3 specific objectives. Out of the problem, or out of this research study, which is to assess the accessibility and acceptability of the voluntary counseling and testing services for HIV infection in Kibale. Now that you have your statement of your problem, and then from that statement of the problem, you have stated your objectives of the study with general objectives and specific objectives, it is now time to create a significance of the study. So you have the problem, you have presented your objectives in solving that problem. Now you have to state the significance of your study. How may your study helps the community? So the significance of the study is a section in the introduction of your thesis or paper, and its purpose is to make clear why your study was needed and the specific contribution your research made to furthering academic knowledge in your field. The significance of the study is a written statement that explains why your research was needed. It's a justification of the importance of your work and impact it has on your research field. So it's a justification of the importance of your work and impact it has on your research field, its contribution to new knowledge, and how others will benefit from it. This is how you are going to write your significance of the study. First, use your research problem as a starting point. Next, state how your research will contribute to the existing literature in the field. Explain how your research will benefit the society. Mention the specific persons or institutions who will benefit from your study. Indicate how your study may help future studies in the field. Those 5 should be the content of your significance of the study. That is how you write your significance of the study. When it says use the research problem as your starting point, you have to point out why it is important to solve that problem. And when it says state how your research will contribute to the existing literature in the field, how will it going to help other researchers doing research like the one you are performing, you are researching? How may it help the existing literature, the existing research, or the existing studies of other people? And when it says explain how your research will benefit the society, it is because you are doing the research not for yourself. You are doing your research to solve a problem. You are doing research for the community, for the society. It is not for you. It is for your it is for the people, it is for the community, it is for the society. You have to mention the specific persons or institutions who will benefit from your study. This is important because this is a specific. This will this will introduce your research or your work to the people or to your audience, to the readers, who will greatly benefit your research. Specifically, the job of the persons that you are stating in your significance of the study. And then after stating your significance of the study, after you have make your point that your research is important, that your study is important, that it should be pushed through, now you are going to explain, or you are going to declare what are the scope and limitations of your research. And when we say scope, so the scope of a study explains the extent to which the research area will be explored in the work and specifies the parameters within the study will be operating. So basically, this means that you will have to define what the study is going to cover and what is focusing on, what it is focusing on. Basically, the scope means that you will have to define what the study is going to cover and what it is focusing on. Similarly, you also have to define what the study is not going to cover. This will come under the limitations. So generally, the scope of the research paper is followed by the limitations. So as a researcher, you have to be careful when you define your scope or area of focus. So remember that if you broaden the scope too much, you might not be able to do justice to the work, or it might take a very long time to complete. Consider the feasibility of your work before you write down the scope. And then again, if the scope is too narrow, the findings might not be generalizable. So typically, the information that you need to include in the scope would cover the following: the general purpose of the study, the population or sample that you are studying, the duration of the study, the topics or theories that you will discuss, the geographical location covered in the study. You have to be specific with your scope as well as on your limitation, because as it is said, if it is too broad, then if your scope is too broad, you might not able to make it a feasible work. You might not complete the work if it generalizes things or the scope. So you have to be specific as well as in your limitations. There are two different statements in writing a scope and limitations. So there are these limitations and delimitations. So limitations are influences that the researcher cannot control. So if we talk about limitations, so now let me go back to a scope. When we say scope, it is the things that is included in your research. You have to be more specific in that. What are the things? What are the topics? What are the theories that is included in your research? That is the scope. If we say limitations, those are the shortcomings, the one that is not included or cannot be included in your research. Are influences. Limitations are influences that the researcher cannot control. They are the shortcomings, conditions, or influences that cannot be controlled by the researcher that place restrictions on your methodology and conclusions. So any limitations that might influence the result should be mentioned. So there are things uncontrollable by the researcher. You cannot control the limitations. It is always be there. You cannot proceed to, or you cannot make this scenario or this scope because of this limitation. So you have to include that in your scope and limitations. Now, the second part of that is the delimitation. So the delimitations are choices made by the researchers which should be mentioned. So they describe the boundaries that you have set to the study. So if the limitation is those are the shortcomings which the researchers has no control, the limitations are controlled by the researchers. So it is the choice of the researcher to not include those things. So those are the limitations. Say if you have this list and you don't want, if you are trying to create a software-based solution to a problem, and then this software-based solution has a feature, but there are features that you cannot do, you cannot program. You lack the ability to program that feature in your software-based solution. So you have to put that into your delimitation. That means it can be added. It's just that you lack the ability to add that feature in your software-based solution to the problem. So you have to delimit your scope. You have to state that as your delimitations, and these delimitations can be introduced to the next researcher. You can include that in your recommendations in the later part of the manuscript. Okay, so the scope are the things that included in your research, in your scope, in your purpose. Those are the things that are included in your objectives, the general and specific objectives. So those things are what we call scope. But if it is uncontrollable if it is a situation which hinders the research, in that the researcher has no control on those shortcomings, those are what we call limitations. But if those things that is or can be added, can be controlled, but just the researcher lacks the ability to include that in the scope, so purposely the researcher put that into the delimitations part of the scope and limitations or delimitations. If we say scope, it is the specific range of variables that is or that are included in your objectives. Limitations are the shortcomings that can't be controlled by the researcher, and then the delimitations are things that can be controlled by the researcher. It's just that there are some reasons that it is not um, be available in the research or in the scope. So those are the limitations. Again, the scope is the range of the study, the one included in your objectives. The limitations are the things that cannot be controlled by the researcher, that hinders the objectives of the study. And then the limitations are those things that can be controlled by the researcher, but is purposely put into limitations of the current research. So this is just a bonus, but the definition of terms is just so much like a, a dictionary in your chapter 1, which talks about the terms, difficult terms that is used in your research, those terms that are not familiar to your readers, that you need to explain so that they can understand if they see those words, if they encounter those words in your research. So those are unfamiliar terms, so you have to define those terms. So if you are doing a formula, or you are naming a formula, you are naming things, you have to explain those, especially if you have this abbreviation and other specific terms included in your research which are unfamiliar to the readers. You have to put that into your definition of terms. So that's all for today. I hope you learned something about the statement of a problem, objectives of the study, general and specific objectives, the significance of the study, and then the scope and limitations. Then the last one is the definition of terms. So that's it, everyone. If you have more questions and clarifications, or you have suggestions, please comment down below. Thank you.